So Gloria,
Um,
please go ahead.
Thank you, Claire. I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick, so if my voice goes down a bit, please remind me so I can speak a little bit louder. My name is Gloria. I'm from Uganda. I'm an activist. I'm an LGBTIQ plus activist, and the bill, like the situation before the bill, during and after the passing of the bill, has been very hostile for LGBT Ugandans, and the visibility around persecution of LGBT persons is just happening right now. But what people don't know is that it started way back as early as 2022. And the landmark incident that started everything that led up to the passing of the bill was, first of all, the closure of the biggest network, actually the only network for LGBT organizations, called Sexual Minorities Uganda. So in 2020, around August, before that, there had been meetings with lots of religious leaders, and a lot of the impact being sponsored by an organization called, I think it's called Family Watch International, which is overseen by Sharon Slater, who allegedly leads the family caucus at the UN. And a lot of it involved engaging religious leaders across different religious denominations and talking to them and sensitizing them about how they can come up and draft a bill that will protect families by criminalizing same-sex relationships. And before the bill that currently has been passed, religious leaders themselves, through the Interreligious Council, drafted a draft bill, which we got to know about, but which was never publicly out. And during that time, part of the consultations on that initial draft bill involved listing and naming of organizations that they think are promoting homosexuality. And SMAG, which was eventually closed, was one of the organizations named, but also a list of over 22 other organizations were listed. I work with an organization called Freedom and Rome Uganda, and we were part of the organizations that was put on the list. So the list was taken to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. They began their internal investigations, and somehow the list was leaked. During the time when the list was leaked, a lot of investigations had already started with the network SMAG. So the NGO Bureau comes out and makes a public statement and says they are indefinitely suspending the operations of Sexual Minorities Uganda. And then from there, the ball rolled, like things never went back. There began being lots of protests from religious leaders, lots of mobilizations by religious fundamentalists calling upon the public to advocate for a law that protects their children from being recruited and abused by putting in place an Anti-Homosexuality Act. So during that time, in the midst of all that chaos, the Member of Parliament who eventually was able to table it, called Asman Basarira, took parliamentary leave, went and drafted the bill, brought it back to Parliament. Now, this is around, I think, January of this year. And the process through which the bill passed is a process that has never been passed through for any bill in this country. Like, it was so fast, the consultations were so rushed. People, like, typically when a bill is tabled, the public is allowed to engage with clauses that they feel are problematic or that they need to be amended. And that kind of consultations happens with the Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament. And I remember when the first reading was done, and then the second and third reading were done on the same day. That has never happened. And I remember one of the questions was asked to the speaker was that, have you consulted with LGBT communities? And she very arrogantly said, if they are there, let them come and speak for themselves. And it is that same meeting when she claimed that this time voting for or against the bill has to be public in Parliament. Like, she was very bent on shaming any parliamentarians who would come up and be against the bill, because then you have to vote by show of hands. So that means your entire constituency is watching you make a decision that they feel is going to affect this country as well as the constituents. We were able to engage the Legal and Parliamentary Committee, of course. Fox Odoi, I will speak about him later. Is one of the members of parliament that is working very closely with the community, but also sits on the Legal and Parliamentary Committee. And during that meeting, I personally was very annoyed with how the committee reacted because they were bashing most of the submissions we were making. They were being sarcastic and making all these funny comments about how even animals know not to have same-sex relationships, how like God created, I don't know, man for woman. Like they were making very sarcastic and insulting comments to us. And I remember Honorable Fox Odoi being like, and we weren't even given enough time because before we were able to make all the submissions, they were like, I think your time is up. We have other meetings to attend to. So Honorable Fox Odoi is like, if there are other things within the submission that you haven't presented before the committee, you can give me your submission. I'll read through it and I will make sure that everything that's part of this submission, I'll present in the minority report that I'll present before the parliament. So the Legal Affairs Committee, what it does is when a bill is tabled, the general public is called upon to engage. So any submissions that come out from the general public, be it like civil society, scholars, whoever, the legal committee will constitute all those submissions and present them back to the parliament to tell them this is what people are saying about the bill. And most of the submissions we made when the legal committee was presenting back were not read. Lucky enough, Fox Odoi, who I mentioned before, was able to read the minority report. And as he was reading the minority report, like it seemed like he was on his own. Like there was no other member of parliament that stood with him or that showed any interest in what the minority report had to say. Either way, it was presented. And amendments were made, and on 26th of May, the president signed the bill into law. When he signed the bill, 4 days later, it was gazetted. So implementation began according to the law. But way before even the signing of the bill, like during the part of the consultations or readings in parliament, of course, the general public was very engaged. And because so many times the public does not get the opportunity for bills or laws to be explained to them, just the tabling of it made many people assume that now a law has been put in place that criminalizes same-sex relationships. So even by then, before even it was assented to by the president, it had already begun being implemented by the general public. People were being beaten, people were being raped. By people, I'm talking about LGBTI persons, being evicted, being sent away from their jobs, being sent away from homes, being thrown out of their residences by their landlords. And eventually, as the bill is being gazetted, if you look at some of the clauses, I'll not mention everything, but I'll point out some of the very problematic clauses in the bill. If you look at some of them, the implementation is going so badly because even people that would be able to support or come through for LGBT people are scared because of what the clauses of the bill says. So to protect themselves, they end up like crossing over to the other side that is persecuting and discriminating. Some of the clauses that are very problematic would be one around the offense of homosexuality. So what this clause talks about is any person that is caught engaging into sexual acts with a person of the same sex is liable for life imprisonment. But implementation of that, I'm wondering how that is going to be and how evidence is going to be presented, because what evidence do you present? Do you film people having sex and then present that in the court as evidence? Because my fear is that now LGBT people will be kidnapped, blackmailed, forced to have sex in front of cameras in order to save their lives, and then that will be used as exhibits in court. Another one is about aggravated homosexuality. So there are many clauses, there are many examples under there where aggravated homosexuality includes sex with a minor, if you have power over that person. So if you're like a relative, a parent of that person, if having sex with that person has caused them to get a mental illness, if that person is older in age. Some of them I really agree with because they protect people that are vulnerable, but there are also clauses in there like a serial offender, which means if you have been involved, not exactly involved, if you've been caught in engaging in homosexual acts over a period of time, then you're liable to be put to death. So that's what, so if you sleep with someone that's a child, they kill you. If you sleep with someone that is older, they kill you. If someone ends up having a mental issue because of a same-sex act, they will kill you. If you are a serial offender, I personally will be a serial offender because I'm a lesbian woman. I'm in a lesbian relationship. I'm living with my partner. I have lived with my partner for over 10 years. I don't see my relationship ending right now because, I don't know, a bill passed. So just the fact that an adult, is in a consensual relationship with an adult and loving ourselves fiercely makes me a serial offender. And just my relationship, the kind of relationship I'm in, warrants me to be put to death. Then there's one about child grooming. And the child grooming is, they allege that LGBT people are recruiting or teaching young children how to be gay. So the child grooming is looking at it from that angle. But if you look at what the bill talks about, it's about denying young people access to sexuality education. Because the bill explicitly talks about if you provide information through teaching, through books, through showing a movie that involves children seeing same-sex relationships or acts happening, then you are child grooming. And that's a crime which is liable to 20 years in prison. Then there is one about promotion. So promotion comes, I think Claire mentioned something like that before. Right now, what is happening here, this conversation is promotion. Promotion also looks at premises. If a landlord is renting out premises for homosexual activities, so that means the person that is renting the house to me and my partner right now is promoting landlords that are renting out premises to offices. Our office, as we speak, has been evicted. The premises which is to house our office is a premise that where our office has been since 2006. Like way over 10 years we've been in the same premise, and our landlord wrote to us and said with immediate effect, you need to leave. Promotion also includes funders, so funding entities that are supporting work or organizations that have work that involves same-sex relationships or advocacy around LGBT issues are also promoting media. So what happens if you're caught promoting? You're liable to imprisonment for 10 years, and in worst case incidences, they could revoke your license. It also talks about disqualification, about conviction. So if I am convicted for being LGBT, then automatically I have to be disqualified from my job. Like as long as you're convicted, then that gives your employers leeway to disqualify you from job. What does that mean? Very many people are going to be unfairly dismissed from work just because of who they love or how they identify. And then there's a component of you have to declare your sexual offense. Like if I'm convicted for being an LGBT person, even if I serve my time and go out of prison, everywhere I go to ask for a job or a house, I have to declare. So basically, they're turning LGBT people into sex offenders. So they're going to almost constitute a sex offenders record or registry, whereby any person that's convicted for being LGBT becomes automatically a sex offender. That is why now you have to keep declaring that I'm a sex offender every time you look for a house or go or look for a job. Then there's the one of duty to report, where if you know an LGBT person, you have to report. And if you don't, you're liable to 5 years if they find out that you knew an LGBT person and you didn't report. Now imagine, do you know how many people are LGBT in your circles? Some of them you may know, some of them you may not. Would you be able, as a parent, they expect you to report your child that they're LGBT. As a brother, they expect you to report your sister or brother that they're LGBT. And if you don't, then you're liable for 5 years in prison. So in short, that is what the bill is about. And I think as I was talking about the bill, I was also talking about some of the impacts of implementation of the bill. But just to sum them up, of course, a lot of evictions are happening. People are being thrown out of home because there's a duty to report. So for someone to protect themselves from the duty to report or to protect themselves from being called a promoter, they'll throw you out. We are struggling with access to health. There is an article that was published by, it's called Reuters, I think. Reuters, it's like a media house, about an organization called Icebreakers Uganda. It is an MSM. It's a gay organization. So they run a clinic which provides access to HIV medications to gay men living with HIV. And an article was published, I think last week, where the doctor in that facility was saying the entire week they have not had any HIV patient coming to the clinic to receive medication. And this is happening in the same facility where they used to receive over 50 people reaching out to access medical care. Now, they're afraid. They're afraid because I think entering the premises automatically makes the public know that this person is gay. So they're afraid to be seen entering the facility. So for their own safety, they'd rather go on drug holidays and compromise their health because they're afraid of what would happen if people got to know that they are in a same-sex relationship. And in regards to talking about access to health, so of course when the bill passed, USAID and PEPFAR released a statement about how implementation of this bill is going to be problematic towards implementing HIV interventions that they're already doing in this country, because they're like, it's going to increase discrimination in healthcare, which is going to make sections of the population, especially key populations, unable or afraid to access HIV services. And I think the government has felt that pressure a bit because on 5th of June, the Director General of the Ministry of Health released a statement which he sent to government hospitals, health centers, faith-based hospitals, saying nobody is, because what part of what PEPFAR mentioned is that we are going to pull out Global Fund money because we don't want to fund a country or a health system that is clearly going to discriminate people in healthcare. How then are we making sure that we are reaching the 1990 goal when people are not able to access healthcare because of how they identify or who they love? And I think they have felt that pinch because on 5th, the Director General of the Ministry of Health released a statement to government health centers, faith-based health centers, like most health centers, and talked about, of course, we don't want any discrimination in healthcare. No one should be discriminated because of who they are or how they identify when they come to access medication, which of course is a clear contradiction because you have that statement out and you have a bill that is talking about promotion and duty to report. So how are those two going to be implemented concurrently? Of course, a lot of persecution is happening. A lot of loss of shelter is happening. There's a lot of homelessness that is happening right now. There have been shelters that existed before for LGBT people that were homeless. And now those shelters don't exist because they were raided when the bill was passed. They were raided because they were misunderstood to be brothels or huge houses where young people are being taught how to be gay. So because they were raided, now we have LGBT people that are homeless, that are just loitering on the streets, which streets are not safe for them because now on the streets, anyone can attack you and do anything to you and they can't be held accountable because no one is even being liable or taking responsibility for you as a person. There's a lot of, so yeah, also like mental health, of course. Our mental health has been impacted by what is being said in the media, by the implementation of the bill. The police themselves are implementing the bill. As we speak, we have over 60 LGBT people currently detained in prisons who have been rounded up by police in different instances, rounded up in bars, rounded up in organizations, rounded up in clinics. Recently, there was a story, I don't know if my Ugandan colleagues were able to see that story, where Enanga came to speak up about a young boy, 15 years, who was thought to be LGBT. So his community attacked him, tied him up, stuffed his mouth with a cloth, and rapped him with a stick. And of course, we went to Twitter and was so mad about protection of people. And the spokesperson, Enanga, came out and spoke about, we are not sure if this person is LGBT. Maybe they have attacked them for another reason, like trying to downplay it. Yet they know very well that the bill that they have passed is what is causing a lot of public panic and causing very many LGBT people to be persecuted and attacked. What are we doing as a community? So as a community, we are still organizing, but it's really hard because, of course, our safety is of paramount importance for us. But also, one of the tricky things that people do not understand is communities or countries like Uganda are very communal. So you don't live your life for you alone. So I, as Gloria, right now, as a lesbian woman, this bill is not only affecting me as a person, but it's affecting my entire family. It's affecting my mother, it's affecting my dad, it's affecting my siblings, because they're put in a position of duty to report, but they're also scared and worried about my safety. Right now, my mom called me and told me, come home for your safety. Like, I want you to be here so I know you're safe. But I couldn't go home because my worry is if I go home and they try and raid my home, then they're probably going to attack or injure my parents. They would rather attack me alone than attack my entire family because I have gone home, because they think that it is safe for me over there. So what are we doing as a community? We are organizing. We are organizing in support. Some civil society organizations, especially those that are doing legal, pro bono legal work, are supporting us. So we have filed 2 petitions against the bill. We also filed an injunction together with Fox Odoi, the member of parliament has talked about. We filed an injunction that was calling for the immediate suspension of the implementation of the bill because of how poorly it was being implemented. And the Attorney General responded, I think, last week and declined our injunction. He's like, I cannot take this, I cannot accept this. This is already contradicting with a law that has been passed, but it's also contradicting with prior laws that are happening. So as we speak, we are now only awaiting to hear from the courts of Uganda about the hearing of the 2 petitions that we filed. One petition was filed about the unconstitutionalism and the fact that the bill is a gross violation of human rights. The other petition was about the implementation itself, of course. So it was including testimonies and data on attacks that have happened to LGBT persons as a result of the passing of the bill. We also worked, like 170 CSOs have worked with us from around the world, including the Middle East, Europe, North and South America, Africa. They worked with us on a letter that we sent to the World Bank, calling upon the president of the World Bank to defend the importance of inclusive economic development. And I think the president came out and spoke about how, so we're calling upon that and suspension of loans to Uganda if laws like this are happening in this country. And I think the president came out and spoke about how barbaric laws like that clearly impact economic development of a country, because it will force investors to leave. It affects tourism. It affects people's ability to work. What else? Of course, other different countries are coming up and standing in solidarity with us. The US Embassy has been very profound with the PEPFAR and USAID announcement. They also announced visa restrictions for members of parliament that signed were for the bill. The UK Prime Minister has spoken publicly, and he has also had a meeting with our Ugandan Foreign Minister. I'm not sure what was discussed in that meeting, I haven't yet been able to gather those details. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau has also come out and spoken, and he was very public about the fact that Canada is ready to receive any LGBT refugees that want to flee or run away from persecution. I think, in a nutshell, that's it. I spoke so much. Thank you.
Oh, you haven't spoken too much at all, Gloria. We really appreciate the insight that you've given us. I'm just going to pose one or two questions to you, if that's okay. And then if you stay till the end, we might have some more questions for the panelist. So there's one in particular on the call, which you kind of touched on, but you might be able to give us a little bit more detail. So one of the people has asked how the law can be applied, and how can anyone prove who has had sex with anyone else unless someone testifies. And I know you mentioned that you think the implementation of the law is going to be the problem, and what the threshold for evidence is. Has there been any cases so far where it's become apparent what the threshold for evidence is, or are we still in very early stages and we're not sure about that yet?
It's still in very early stages, but now where the problem is people are getting arrested and they can't access justice because they are still investigating and getting evidence. So, of course, if you're detained in, let me say, a police station, after 48 hours, they'll take you to prison as you await court hearing. Now, as an LGBT person, until they're able to gather enough evidence for them to parade you before the court, you're not sure how long you're going to be in the prison. So now your prayer is, I hope I don't get into any situation where I'm arrested and detained, because it could take you years before you're taken to court. And then if the evidence is never got, like, what happens? How long will they investigate? Yeah.
Thank you, Gloria. And there was another question that I wanted to ask as well, based on something you said very early in the conversation. So you were talking about the way the legislation had been rushed through, and you had your stage 2 and 3 reading in a day. So I was wondering, is that because the politicians believe there isn't support for this within the Ugandan general population, and therefore they're trying to rush it through? Or is there a sense on the ground that this is supported by the majority of the population, and does that make you feel at risk, or do you feel like it's a political objective rather than something that people in Uganda want?
I feel they mobilized quite well. So, of course, already they had the support. But I also think they did not want to delay just in case anything came through that would pause the passing. So in trying to rush, they were as unconstitutional as they could get, but they had to make sure this gets passed as soon as possible. But so many times, LGBT people are used as scapegoats, because every time, not every time, but many times when these bills, anti-homosexuality bills, are passed in the country, they are normally a diversion from something that very important is happening in the country. So already there's a lot of gun violence, there's a lot of political unrest, there are a lot of things, there's a lot of looting and stealing of public property. There are a lot of things that the government needs to be accountable or answerable to the general public right now. And a bill is a very clear distraction. Yeah.
Thank you, Gloria. There's another question there's another couple of questions that might go into slightly too much detail, but we will find the answers for them if you can't answer them, Gloria. One again is there a global convention that prohibits them from holding individuals indefinitely without evidence? I guess that would mean that Uganda would subscribe to international law. I don't know if you have any more details on that, but we can certainly find out the answer for that one if you don't know, Gloria.
I honestly don't know that. I would also have to investigate more.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, isn't it? Especially with things like Guantanamo and those other things. There's lots of other circumstances where that's not necessarily applied, but we'll look into that. And then there's one more question that hasn't come through the Q&A, but is in the chat box. So I'm just going to ask this one as well, and then we'll move on to Alessandro, and I'm sure more questions will arise and we can field more at the end. So one of the participants says they understand that the public are being used or encouraged to implement this law, given the economic dependence on foreign aid. How committed to the death penalty is Museveni? And is this a deterrent utilising protracted law enforcement? So that's probably quite a couple of questions there potentially rolled into one. So do you think people are willing to implement this, I guess, and the penalties, do you think Museveni would go to it, or is it more, or is it a deterrent that possibly won't actually be implemented?
People are excited to implement this. Like, people are really excited to implement this. But about the death penalty, so I think, I'm not so sure, but I think the death penalty is something that is not existing in Uganda anymore. So what they do in the instances of where your conviction calls for a death penalty, they'll put you on life sentence.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. So another question has come through, but I'm going to hold that one until the end. It's in the chat box. I'm going to hold it to the end because I think it can be better or responded to by some of our other panelists as well. I just want to encourage people to use the Q&A box rather than the webinar chat box, just because it's easier to keep track of the questions, and we can see afterwards which have been answered and which ones we still need to come back to, whereas the chat boxes will disappear at the end of this call. So I'm going to invite Alessandro on next. So for those of you who've joined the call slightly later, Alessandro is head of LGBTQ policy for Welsh Government. Many of you will know that Welsh Government it's early this year actually, it feels like last year, but probably only this year, published their LGBTQ action plan, which had elements of how we want to demonstrate values through our international relationships. And obviously that will potentially give us some views and ways of working with countries that implement these kind of laws. But Alessandro is at the forefront of that policy at the moment. So Alessandro, if I hand over to you, and you can kind of introduce where you're at with Welsh Government, and again, encourage people to ask questions in the Q&A chat box. We'll field some to Alessandro at the end or as we go along, or to the full panel. So Alessandro, over to you.
Thank you so much, Claire. So I prepared a short PowerPoint for today. I also appreciate that my colleague, another official from Welsh Government, should be here today. I still cannot see them in the panelist list.
He is here. It's okay, and we'll be inviting him to speak afterwards.
Wonderful. I wonder if perhaps John wants to open with a broader overview, and then for me to then dive into the LGBTQ plus angle of it. But I will need to look at your colleagues for that.
We might need you to go first, Alessandro, simply because John is only able to dial in from his phone, so we can't invite him as a panelist. We can only invite him to speak, so it might be easier to go first. But John is on WhatsApp, and he will inform us if he wants to change the order. But I think you're okay to start.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to share my screen just to tell you a bit more about what we are currently doing in Wales, and how this can be relevant for some conversations that are currently happening. So if technology helps today, I cannot see you anymore, but can you tell me if you can see this red screen with the
we title? Can see it, yeah.
Beautiful,
perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Claire, and everyone for inviting us today to talk about the work that we're currently doing in Wales. And I hope that this can be useful for future conversations about developing policy positions in this particular area of work, especially in Wales. So I wanted to give, first of all, a bit of an overview of what we are currently doing within the Welsh Government and in Wales to support LGBTQ plus people in Wales. You may have heard of the LGBTQ plus action plan for Wales, which we published in February 2023, so just a few months ago. It feels like yesterday, but it also feels like a long time ago. And there's various actions under this action plan. There's roughly 137 activities across different policy areas, from sports, culture, education, healthcare, social care, international relations, human rights, and much more. We also run several research projects within this sphere of policy to inform our policy positions, policy advice, and we support various organizations in Wales around the support for LGBTQ+ people, but also offering social opportunities, including pride events across the nation. There's various commitments that the Welsh Government has made in the Programme for Government. I'm pretty sure that everyone has heard of the Programme for Government document, but if not, there's it compiles and it gathers the commitments of the Welsh Government within the Senate term. And there's several commitments that concern LGBTQ+ people in Wales, from banning conversion practices to work around gender recognition, supporting pride events across the country, and more. So the overarching commitment that led to the LGBTQ+ action plan for Wales is this ambition of making Wales the most LGBTQ+ friendly nation in Europe. Now, this may, for some people, may sound quite abstract, but if we compare Wales with other countries in Europe, such as, for instance, Malta, we can develop a series of milestones and steps to achieve that ambition. So, to an extent, the action plan serves as a framework for us to identify the best direction of travel to reach that goal. But it can also be useful for organizations and groups across Wales to see what the ambitions are in this in the public sector, third sector, and more. And now we can align to have a coherent and cohesive approach to reach that ambition in Wales collectively. And this can also be useful to devise policies that can have an impact even beyond our immediate borders. The framework, as I mentioned before, has an impact on not just on the policy areas of equality and human rights within which this action plan was developed, but it has an immediate impact on other policy areas in Wales, including health, sports, education, and much more. One of the main and critical elements of our action plan is to protect and defend the rights and dignity of transgender non-binary people. So many of the actions in the action plan immediately address and cover those communities and those groups. And this is, again, across several policy areas, not just human rights, but also education, safety, housing, healthcare, sports, and much more. So to develop the action plan, we have several tools, and these can be useful for activists and advocates in Wales or beyond. They can be used to monitor the progress and implementation of the LGBTQ+ action plan. An example is, for instance, our stakeholder bulletin that we send out regularly every 2 months, or at least that's our ambition. We just set up the stakeholder bulletin, and through that we send out resources, updates on support services and opportunities, and much more. Another tool for advocates and activists is the tracker we published last week in line with the Pride weekend in Cardiff, the LGBTQ+ action plan tracker. Everyone can use that website to look at and to monitor the implementation of the action plan against each activity and action. There's a kind of a living website where every now and then regularly we will update progress against each activity. So on one hand, it can help activists and advocates do their work, but on the other hand, it serves as a hub of resources, of support services, and various tools that people can use. For instance, there people can find information about how to use the Live Fear Free helpline for people who are victims or survivors of abuse and domestic violence, the Hate Hurts campaign, or the Victim Support Wales helpline. We work with Gallup to develop support services and promote support services for survivors of conversion practices in Wales, so people can find how to access those type of resources in English and Welsh language through the tracker. And this is very new. It just happened last week. So I encourage people to have a look at that and get some positive or ideas on how to be involved in what we're currently doing in the nation. We also have various other tools, including various panels and groups, and a framework to monitor success of the plan. I'm going to give here just a visual of what this tracker look like, and now this can really be a useful tool for activists and advocates to see what is out there in terms of resources or support services. What are the recent updates on this? Where are we going? Where is our current work? What is our current work, and what is still left to do? So there you go. Feel free to have a look online. The website is live. Now, for the topic of conversation of today's meeting, I want to focus on a couple actions that are in the action plan. As I mentioned before, there's about 46 actions and more than around 137 activities across different policy areas. But two in particular relevant for today's conversation. One is the commitment of the Welsh Government to showcase, through international engagement, our LGBTQ+ value and support in Wales and globally for LGBTQ+ people. On various occasions, we have worked with our offices across different nations and countries in the world to make sure that the work that we are doing on the action plan and with communities in Wales can be showcased and can be shared with others. Another action that is relevant for today's conversation is our work around banning LGBTQ+ conversion practices. There are debates here around what is the legislation in Wales, what is the legislation in the UK, what are the devolved or reserved competencies in Wales for addressing this particular issue. There's multiple ways of going around and about this particular policy commitment to banning conversion practices. The ministers have already made clear commitments on the actions that they see we can undertake from now until we achieve a full ban. This includes, for instance, the establishment of a working group of experts in Wales to help develop our policy positions and policy mechanisms. We started those conversations in December, and we meet every month with this group of experts. And every month we publish on a dedicated website what we learn through that engagement, what our communities want us to do. So it's an invaluable archive and repertoire of advice. So I suggest people have a look at this particular website if they want to know more about what can be done in Wales and what can be shared, and also to develop policy position around this across third sector organizations and beyond. So there are resources there, but there's also more work that we do in terms of research, in terms of awareness campaign, and support services for survivors in Wales. This is relevant for some aspects of the conversations that are currently happening around the developments in Uganda. So there are a few considerations that I would like to share with you, elements of the debates and elements of these of issues that we want to think about, and we want to keep developing together, hearing about what people feel, hearing about what organizations and groups are currently experiencing or suggest, to make sure that these conversations can then be and considerations can then be shared. I appreciate that some organizations, groups have not developed policy positions on this matter. So it's, for some people, it's still the very early stages. Some of these considerations are probably, first of all, the importance of safety for communities, both in Wales and outside of Wales, in particular in Uganda. So when we have these conversations, to be mindful of the potential risks or exposing people at further risks or further discrimination. So making sure that our messages and our engagements are mindful of the potential risks that people may be exposed to, or difficulties or issues they may experience. The second element of the discussion is around developing awareness of terminology and concepts in Wales. I have seen some beautiful work done out there, and I'm going to discuss that in a moment, in particular by Hub Cymru Africa and by Stonewall, on facilitating conversations around terminologies and concepts. Now, sometimes going back to basics for some people may seem a bit redundant. Sometimes it's instead seen as a very important step to allow people to feel empowered to take part in the conversation, understand what the conversation is about, the various concepts. For instance, what is conversion practices? What do you mean a ban on conversion practices? What do you mean by queerness? Or what are the considerations around the development of this concept in the past few hundred years, both in Wales, but also outside of Wales? So having opportunities to facilitate this type of conversations and sharing the knowledge around this can be very helpful to bring people up to speed around the concept and the terminology. Again, it may seem something basic for some people. I believe that is something that sometimes is needed recurrently, having like cyclic refreshments or seasonal refreshments on terminology, or where we are in terms of our understanding of some concept on homosexuality related to colonial or post-colonial history, the political and cultural context of this concept within Wales and beyond. So I wouldn't take it for granted, and there's work that can be done to empower people and make sure that the people that are involved in the development of this concept are at the front, at the center of these conversations. Another element that we are thinking about at the moment is the importance of engagement with international organizations. As I mentioned before, a lot of groups and communities do not have a clear policy position on these issues yet. In particular, well, in Europe, there are some governments or some groups that have put out their statements and they have a clear policy position. So an element of this is around how do you develop policy positions? What are the resources out there? So rather than pushing internal conversations on what can be done, looking at what is already available out there and supporting the work that people are doing out there in terms of international engagement, it can be very, very useful to develop tools and expertise, but also to capitalize on the tools and expertise of others to facilitate certain type of conversations. Another element that we are considering now is how do we share in Wales good practice and resources. So if there is a group of people or communities in Wales that are aware of the work that we are doing, then we are really empowering people to be part of that type of discourse and conversation. In particular, I'm thinking of the beautiful resources that Hub Cymru Africa has produced over the past few years, for instance, around the intersection between Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, religion and spiritual beliefs, and LGBTQ+ rights. I've seen some of the work done during History Months, and the work done during Pride months, and these resources are out there. There's some work that some charities have done in the UK and in Wales, again, on the intersection between minority ethnic groups, religion and spiritual beliefs, and LGBTQ+ rights. That has can have a lot of positive benefits and positive impact. Again, if you think about the importance of developing awareness around the concept and the language and the terminology used, but also about the history of the work done and the history of certain concepts, and sometimes also the history of certain misconceptions or beliefs around LGBTQ+ rights. Those resources are useful. The United Nations keep developing resources. Just now, a new report was published on the intersection between religion, spiritual beliefs, and LGBTQ+ rights. I think Victor Madrigal published the report just a couple of days ago. And also we have our LGBTQ+ action plan tracker, with examples of resources for victims of hate crimes, victims and survivors of conversion practices, people who have experiences of domestic abuse and violence. And all these resources can be put together and drafted together with communities on, for instance, a landing page. This is something that I would like to, discuss a bit more after this meeting, understand what would be the best way of sharing these resources and good practice in the country, and what can be done in Wales to share this type of resources. Finally, the work around conversion practices, it is relevant again for certain elements of the developments in Uganda around, for instance, conversion practices, or what sometimes I call conversion therapy programs or conversion therapy. So what is the position of Wales on this? It is very clear that the ministers have strong policy lines on that, on banning conversion practices and the harmful and negative impact on these practices. So there's a lot of work that went into that in Wales with communities, but also develop support services in English and Welsh language, and what those support services look like, to make sure that we support people, but also not re-trigger people in the process of trying to support them and help them. I think I'm going to stop here for now. And more than offering answers, we are offering more questions and considerations, and areas where we can talk about even more questions or potential answers. Let me see if I can now stop sharing.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you, Alessandro. There's been a question or two in the Q&A box, but I think I might wait until we've also heard from John, because there'll be a shared position, I think, in terms of Wales and Uganda-based partnerships. But a question from me, I suppose, is you've talked about kind of the international elements of the LGBTQ action plan. And I was just wondering if there has been any opportunities or working with other countries so far, which Wales have been able to demonstrate their kind of solidarity with LGBTQ people. Have there been any? I know it's a very new framework and action plan, so maybe not yet. And this is why these discussions are important to be had to work out the implementation. But has there been any instances so far where you've had that opportunity?
So yes, as you say, the action plan was just published 3 months ago, but we do work with offices in different countries to share the LGBTQ+ action plan in different countries. I can probably get you more information on this after this conversation, and probably John can provide you with more details around this. We do have a team of officials that are dedicated to kind of facilitate this type of conversation and liaise with the Welsh Government offices in different nations. So that has been going on at the moment.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. It's really useful, and I imagine actually not everyone is familiar with this action plan yet, because it is very new, and Wales thus far hasn't taken a strong stance on this. So it's good to see, and it's good to kind of get people thinking about it and how decisions will be made about how we work going forward. Now, I'm just going to park any questions. There are a couple in the chat box, but I think, again, you and John combined might be able to do them between you. And similarly, Gloria might want to come back in on some issues as well. So, John, I'm just going to look for you in the participants box and invite you to speak. And I think it should be okay, because John's on his phone. It might take a slightly different tone. So I'm just going to allow John to speak, and you are on mute, John. So if you're able to come off mute and just share your overarching thoughts, that would be marvellous. Or the anticipation. If not, I'm going to just take the position myself. John, we're not able to hear you, so I'm just going to if I ask you to unmute, if that works. Okay. This is, or even after however many, we've got John's name there, so that's good. Now I'm just waiting to see if he can come off mute, and if not, I'm going to talk us through aspects of what Gloria said, but I'm just going to give John another few seconds. I can see you off mute. Thank you, John. Please feel free to join in. We can hear you, yeah.
Oh, that's a relief. I'm very sorry for adding to the stress and strains of organising such a meeting. I'm very grateful to Hub Cymru Africa for organising today's event, and I hope it's the start of a lengthy conversation that we can have together. Thanks to Gloria for your very powerful contribution and for your courage. The situation that you've clearly outlined is just so awful and desperate, and you know, I'm sure we'd all want to send our love and best wishes to you and the LGBTQ plus community in Uganda. Thanks too to Alessandro, who's it's great to have the support of such a colleague as we wade through this. I really value the opportunity to discuss the issues around the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but I'm afraid I want to say up front that I'm not here to offer a solution or a pathway for us. But you know, I think this is a conversation that we all need to have as a position is developed, and I'd be very happy to continue this conversation with anyone if you want to contact me after the meeting. So just to give a bit of Welsh context to our engagement with Uganda, we've had 20 years of relative calm and stability in Uganda, which has made it a good place for Welsh voluntary organisations to forge partnerships and develop quality services and mutually beneficial projects. In many cases, trust has taken years and years to establish and build up, and lifelong friendships have been formed between Wales and Uganda. There are a great number of links, and many of those are long-standing. Welsh Government has had its own links through our International Learning Opportunities Programme, where we've been sending people on 8-week placements with partners, through the contract we have with the Mbali Coalition Against Poverty, our support for Jennifer's Coffee, and our direct support to the Mbali Trees Programme, as well as our grant funding to Size of Wales. Throughout the last 15 years of sending people to Uganda, we have encouraged everyone we send to raise the issue of LGBTQ plus rights with their partners and hosts when they felt safe to do so. And this has happened very regularly, and as those friendships have developed, I believe in a small way we have made a little difference. Obviously, you know, it hasn't made enough difference, and what's happened with their parliament is just really shocking and dreadful. Not everyone we've sent has felt safe or comfortable raising the issue, and I'm sure there are others who've shied away from the subject and have felt that it's not for them to discuss. So I really wouldn't want to overstate our position, but we have been raising this issue. I've raised it numerous times every time I go, and I think Wales is known for taking a stand on this issue. To give a little bit of Ugandan context from a Welsh perspective, as I said, Uganda has been peaceful and stable for 20 years, and the situation appears to be changed and changing. The Anti-Homosexuality Act is a symptom of wider issues in Uganda, which are making it harder for anyone from Europe or America to work there. Corruption, political disappearances, police violence towards protesters, the closing down of civil society space, authoritarianism all appear to be on the rise and make Uganda a much less attractive place to work and visit. The influence of China and Russia and their very different approach and worldview, combined with the cuts and the now diversion of the UK aid budget towards housing asylum seekers, means that the UK has much less influence in Uganda than it once had. The Welsh Government has no direct government-to-government contact. We've never sought that contact because of the issues maybe I've just talked about. We have some MOUs with a couple of the districts in eastern Uganda. And we're also very much aware that campaigners for this Anti-Homosexuality Act claim that homosexuality is a European import, and that makes it that much harder to speak out as a government on the issue, because that just reinforces that view. And we're also very much aware of what a religiously conservative country Uganda is, and that Ugandan people are generally very conservative with a small c about a whole range of issues, which again make it much harder for there to be a meeting of minds. So I'm left wondering what to advise ministers on what our appropriate response should be. There are people, influential people, saying, why should you be spending my taxes on projects in a country where they want to kill me? And that's a very powerful argument. How do we keep the people that we send and our partners safe whilst promoting our values? We're now advised that we should not be raising the issue of LGBTQ plus rights and dignity when we travel, because it is not safe. I guess it's also worth saying at this point that in our Wales and Africa Action Plan, we pledged to seek to expand our ILO program into Somaliland in support of Wales' largest African diaspora community by far. It's noteworthy that Somaliland is governed by Sharia law. So this is not a straightforward matter, and an ethical foreign policy is not a straightforward and easy matter either. The action we've taken so far is to suspend sending ILO placements or funded visits temporarily whilst we take the temperature and see what's going on. And we're increasing our activity elsewhere. We're working more closely with the British High Commission in Kampala, who have been very helpful. And I really completely agree with Claire that we should leave no one behind. But on the other hand, ours is a very small program and Africa is a very big place. So there are no easy answers. Ultimately, it'll be for Welsh ministers to decide, and we won't be taking any hasty decisions, but we certainly want to be doing what we can to resist this horrible act. It's probably worth finally just reminding you what the UK and the US are advising their citizens. The UK is saying LGBT people or those who are perceived to be LGBT plus could see an increase in cases of harassment, imprisonment, blackmail and violence from people who view the law as justification for attacks. The US has gone further, saying that their citizens should reconsider travel to Uganda due to crime, terrorism and anti-LGBTQI plus legislation. They say the May Anti-Homosexuality Act raises the risk that LGBTQI plus persons and those perceived to be LGBTQI plus could be prosecuted and subjected to life imprisonment or death based on provisions in the law, and may be subject to mandatory reporting to the police if they are suspected of committing or intending to commit acts in violation of the law, and could face harassment or attacks by vigilantes. Supporters of the dignity and human rights of LGBTQI plus persons, including those of youth under the age of 18, could be prosecuted and imprisoned for multi-year sentences. Now, that's the US advice and not the UK advice, but I would very much hope that everyone travelling with Welsh Government funds would be a supporter of the dignity and human rights of LGBTQI plus persons. So we're in a difficult position. I'm done.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Alessandro. So there were some questions that came through into the chat box, which I think you've possibly answered already. So one of them was, will this bill affect partnerships with Wales-based organisations in Uganda? And I think it clearly is going to affect partnerships in some way, depending on how the partnership operates, which communities they're working with, what the purpose of the work is. But right now, the only advice is particularly around the international learning opportunities, which have been suspended, which might slow down developments potentially. I don't know. I don't think, John or Alessandro, you need to say more than you've said, because you've kind of said we haven't got a firm position yet about how this bill will affect the partnership. So unless you want to put anything in specific, I might move to the next one.
Well, it's simply to say, you know, we have, as you know, Claire, in particular, we have very limited funds. Our budget has not increased. We're under a great deal of pressure. There are no extra funds for new work, but as and when projects come up for renewal, you know, that will be the time that we will need to particularly consider what's best for the future.
Thank you, John. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is kind of a similar one
Claire,
here. So, sorry, yes.
Before you continue, I wanted to say something.
Yeah, yes, please, Gloria, please do.
In response to what the previous speakers have talked about, how the bill is going to affect partnerships. Like, I understand the security implications of the bill, but please do not stop supporting civil society organizations that are doing civil society work, because the kind of work we are doing is what is checking what the government is doing. So if civil society is affected, then the government is winning. So when you're having conversations about pulling out of funds, it's okay if it's a government entity, because then they need to feel the pinch. But if the funds are also affecting civil society implementation, meaning now the government is going to go unchecked, because the support that is being received by civil society right now is what is enabling us to relocate people, is what is enabling us to have emergency response, is what is enabling us to have lawyers. So if that kind of support also goes away, then it's going to affect Ugandans so badly. So if an organization if an entity like the Welsh Government is doing work that is partnering with both government and civil society, pull out government, continue supporting civil society. Even if it means allocating the money that has been part of government projects and increasing it to civil society, please do not pull out money into civil society work. It's going to get so bad for us if civil society is also clamped down, because that's what the government is trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Yeah, someone did kind of ask that question in the box about advice on how we should approach talking to our partners about this legislation and how it might impact them. We're very conscious that the need for kind of external solidarity and knowing that other countries and people in civil society are looking and taking action and supporting and not leaving people kind of isolated in these situations is really important. And I think that's always been an approach that we have had in Wales, is that kind of partnership approach where we try and work directly with communities rather than through governments, which John touched on, and that will be a really important part of our ongoing considerations and how we can support activists like you to make sure that you're safe and able to do the work. I'm going to ask another couple of questions before I kind of sum up a few of the points, and there's quite a lot going along. And actually that question's come up twice. It was advice on how we should approach talking to our partners about the legislation, but also what we can as individuals in Wales do to safely support or show solidarity with campaigners and organisations in Uganda. So as well as the funding aspects, Gloria, what do you have any recommendations for what else we might be doing in support of your work that doesn't increase risk but increases kind of resourcing capacity for you?
So a lot of our support is around advocacy. So organizations that are doing advocacy around work around the bill, petitions, popularizing the bill, providing legal response, providing emergency response is support you're looking out for. But then, even if, because there is a very deliberate effort for making it hard for LGBT organizations to work, which includes some of their accounts being frozen. So your partners, even if they are not exactly LGBT organizations, but they are LGBT affirming organizations, support them to be safe spaces for LGBT people.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you very much. There's another question here from one of the other participants, which I'm going to kind of summarize, which is a person, if you go over there and you're not personally, you don't identify as LGBTQ plus, that it might not impact on you necessarily, but it does impact on the people you work with. And I was going to kind of summarize it at the end, and I think possibly one of the biggest challenges is the part of the legislation that puts an expectation on you to report people for being LGBTQ. And if you yourself were to identify that within someone you're working with or a colleague or a friend, how difficult that might be to personally to either be breaking the law or reporting. And Gloria, I was really sorry to hear about your experience and how horrible that is, much more horrible for you and your family and people who love you to be put in that position. We wouldn't, it's a a way of completely shutting down the conversation, isn't it? Because it scares everyone into silence. But I think that's part of the problem is potentially as well with people who have partners already, and how compromised they might feel by that position potentially. And that's something that needs to be considered in ongoing work. I don't know if Gloria, Alessandro, or John want to comment on that further. It's definitely something we need to do more thinking on in terms of safety. Not see, oh, John's come off mute, I think.
Well, am I on mute?
You're off mute.
Oh. Yeah, it's exceptionally difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's illegal for me to ask someone who is going out if they're LGBTQI+, and it's illegal basically not to ask them once they get to Uganda. That's the thing. It's the law. You know, you can choose to ignore the law. We can't get our Ugandan partners to say, well, I don't know. I mean, we can't insist, if they choose to do it, knowledgeable of the consequences. And I guess they can say that they are not going to comply with this aspect of the law, but there would be consequences for that, I'm sure. So.
Thank you, John. It's also something we'll have to keep an eye on in exactly in terms of how it's kind of implemented going forward. There was one more question, Alessandro, which might be more for you to answer, because it kind of highlights, like, how do we marry having such a progressive approach to LGBTQ rights in Wales with our partnerships in Uganda? We're in quite different places at the moment. So I said, have you had conversations about how such a progressive country can work with less progressive countries and sharing values? And I know you spoke about colonization and not wanting to kind of reinforce those issues, but there is a lot of disinformation out there already about LGBTQ being a Western import and how we don't continue to reinforce that idea. Quite a complex question, so maybe not easy to answer in a couple of minutes, but if you've got a view, we'd like to hear it.
Yes, so I think it goes back to the suggestion of following up from this meeting and looking to how we can share resources in Wales to begin with. There's a lot of work that we can and should still be doing in Wales to raise awareness about the challenges and barriers of certain community groups under the broader LGBTQ+ umbrella. That includes in particular migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. So the offering opportunities for learning about the challenges, but also the concept and the history around the struggles and the challenges that these groups face, and see what can we do to address them. I think there are commitments in Wales around the anti-racist Wales action plan and the LGBTQ+ action plan that can be used and that can work in synergy to address this. And an element of that is certainly education in different aspects. So a lot of the work starts from us and starts here. And then from here, we will be probably better equipped also to share our values in a practical sense outside of our borders. But we continue to do the work with the Welsh Government offices in terms of sharing what we do, especially during, for instance, Pride Months or Black History Months or Pride Month or Pride History Months or LGBTQ+ History Months. So we try to showcase what we're currently doing here with other communities abroad. But definitely there's room for more conversations after this initial meeting.
Thank you very much. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming through into the chat box at the moment. So again, I just want to reinforce our thanks to Gloria in particular, coming on in a vulnerable position as an activist, whilst you're not only campaigning against this situation, but also being made vulnerable by it and being exposed to the risks. We can't thank you enough for joining us today and getting us thinking and reinforcing why it's so important that we work in support of you and people who are trying to push back and make things in Uganda better for people from an LGBTQ background. You've given us so much to think about from the kind of perspectives of how families, communities, and people are really being forced to kind of either forced into silence so you can't have a conversation that progresses the issue, or forced into silence to try and protect people that they love, which is a very difficult position to be in. And the issues that you spoke about in particular around healthcare. And I know there's people on the call today who support health projects, about how people who need the health projects most, who, for example, are experiencing HIV and AIDS, might now feel like they can't access those spaces anymore, and in turn pushing back progress that has been remarkable in some areas of Uganda. It's awful to hear that might be the situation. I'm glad that we've got so many people on the call today listening, and I know plenty more people have been in touch to say they'll watch it on the video afterwards. It's a powerful discussion, and like we've kind of introduced, we're not going to reach a conclusion at the beginning of this. However, I am interested in people who want to get further involved in LGBTQ plus rights. Hub Cymru Africa are able to coordinate some projects and programs. Potentially, there are a couple of funders who are interested in working with us, and we will keep people like Gloria very much involved in that discussion in order to shape it in a positive way. And if there are Wales partners who are also interested or have ideas, we'd welcome them to formulate some plans, although it's all very, very early stages at the moment. But there's some organisations out there who are active in this area, and know there's some Welsh organisations as well. Gloria, I'm just going to hand over to you for one more second to see if there's any final point or statement that you would like to make, and then I'll do the same for John and Alessandro, and then end the call shortly afterwards. We've got about 3 minutes. So Gloria, if there's anything else you think you'd like to say that's particularly important, we'd really welcome it.
I just want to say thank you for availing me this opportunity to speak and share what I shared with everyone, and just remind the Welsh Government that do not be silent, speak, because our president is feeling the pressure. So please do not be silent. Speak, let the dollar speak, because there are conversations about economics that make more sense to our government. So if you're a person that is giving money, they may not do everything that you want, but of course they'll definitely listen. So if it is something that's okay for you to put out like a public statement or write a letter to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Internal Affairs, whichever works. Claire, I'll also share with you a guideline for all people that are interested in engaging with advocacy around the bill. There are very many guidelines. So whichever is convenient for you or works for you, you can do that. It's for all our partners and allies and embassies.
Thank you, Gloria, and we'll share that widely after the call, so send it my way. So Alessandro and John, over to you if there's anything else you wanted to just pop on the end of the call.
From my side, just to thank you, Claire, and thank to Hub Cymru Africa for all your work. It's really, really helpful for us to have this conversation, and we look forward to meeting you soon again to continue the work.
Thank you, Alessandro. And yeah, John, anything else from your perspective?
I'd like to echo that and say that the First Minister and the Minister for Social Justice have both spoken out against the Act, and the Minister for Social Justice has written to Andrew Mitchell, the UK Government Minister for Africa, again expressing our dismay and disgust and asking for advice on the way forward. So Gloria would be only too happy to take your advice on further letters of support for you. But thanks again for a very powerful contribution.
Thank you, John. Right, I'm going to end the call shortly. There haven't been any more questions that have come through. We will, like I said, be deleting the names of people who've participated today, just so that you can feel safe and know it won't be shared more widely. If you've got questions for Gloria or would like more information, please put them our way. I'm not going to share my email right now because I can't talk and type at the same time, but you will all have one of our generic email addresses having participated in this call today. And I'm also going to thank my colleague Julian, who isn't here today, but actually played a very strong role in coordinating all of this and has been absolutely fundamental to it. So thanks to him as well. Yes, and I'm going to end the call dead on time. That never happens for me, so there's a reason to celebrate. Enjoy your afternoon, and I'll speak to you all individually, and please stay in touch. Thank you very much.